To me, Delmore said sometimes, there's no Geneva Convention in black propaganda. All is allowed. Deception, lies, subversive propaganda and all these things. Nasty things, of course. He was the king of nasty things without any doubt, yeah.
By 1944, the war had entered its last, most vicious stage. America had joined, and the Germans were everywhere in retreat.
In autumn 1944, most of the German officers were convinced that the war was lost. And the political leadership knew that, of course. Goebbels knew that.
Yet they did not give up. Instead, the SS, Delmer's old adversary, took over, under the leadership of Gunther Dalken, and their orders were clear.
Do all you can, by leaflets, by radio broadcasts, and so on, to win time. I asked Dalken, and he answered, believe it or not, we thought that we needed 2 or 3 months. And then the new weapons would decide the war. New weapons, of course, rockets with nuclear warheads. We needed urgently 3, 4, or 6 weeks. And all is allowed to get this time. In other words, the propagandists were the prominent victims of their own propaganda. That's quite funny, isn't it?
To play for time, the Germans unleashed the greatest barrage of sex leaflets ever seen. And it was based on a simple, if brutal, message. Even if your side is winning, if you are killed or crippled, you have lost.
Don't be killed on the battlefield. Stay where you are. It is absolutely nonsense to be killed when a war is won.
To convince the Allied soldier to surrender, or at least slow his advance, the Germans mixed sex with death more directly than ever before, and moved from mere drawings to photography to make it seem more real. On one side, a sex parody of Life magazine, on the other, death.
The Germans, toward the end of the war, really produced a lot of sex leaflets. Some of them very, very good. The Life and Death series is an excellent series. There was about 16 of them produced in all, in different sizes, in full size and miniature, showing either British Tommy helmets on the girls or American, which kind of showed you who they were aimed at.
German leaflets and propaganda radio taunted the soldier, saying if he died, his allies, his officers, even his friends safe back home would enjoy what he had foolishly lost. And finally, they used every soldier's fear of mutilation.
This leaflet is, in my opinion, quite interesting. And if you turn it over, gentlemen prefer blondes, but blondes don't like cripples.
You talk to any man in the front line, they'll say, you know, I don't mind dying, but I don't want to go back a cripple or scarred or disfigured. And the Germans played on that a lot.
You are sitting in a trench and you get this leaflet. I must survive. I must get out of this war. Not as a cripple, but safe and sound.
While the SS were hammering away at the front-line soldier, Delma, ever cleverer and more insidious, had found a softer target, the soldiers' families back home. The so-called dead letters marked one of Delma's darkest projects. These were letters which came from German families who were simply not able to accept that their sons or husbands were dead, and continued to write to them as if they were alive, giving them all the news from home.
Your sister Erna is married. She has a little boy now, named Martin after you. Think of it, dear Martin. You are an uncle now. Do let us hear from you soon, dear boy.
Delma asked to have these letters and wrote back, telling them their son was alive.
Dear Frau, please make no inquiries about the whereabouts of Martin. He is safe and well in a neutral country with a good job. Other comrades are with him. When this terrible war Hitler caused is ended, he will either return to you or send for you. He asks me to send his best greetings to you and Anna, and hopes you are well.
The only signature was a red circle. It was posted in Germany. These were the letters that really horrified me as a child. I'd have been about 9 or 10, probably a little bit older than Zoe. I'd been learning about Germany at school, and I'd read a book written from a child's point of view about life in Germany during the war, and it horrified me to feel that my father was making their lives even sadder, and I was horrified. And I said, you know, but the letters and the things you did were so wrong. And he said, yes, they were wrong, but it had to be done. He was proud of the effect, but he wasn't proud of what he had done.
Oh, he had a conscience, yes. Yes, he had a conscience. But he was a journalist. And he reported the story and was the story. And in that sense, you park your conscience at the door, as a bomber pilot would as about to unleash a load of bombs on Berlin.
For 4 years, Delma had given everything to his war work. Then, just before D-Day itself, Delma's war took its revenge. Isabel, his wife, left him.
I behaved normally at the office, but on leaving would start crying. I knew I had to leave because I could not face his way of life for the indefinite future. I did not want to marry anyone else at that time. Of these weeks I remember only a weight of misery, which nearly crushed me.
But I think it was the war that pulled them apart. Yes, there was a huge attraction, but there was also a need for each to run their own life. And Isabel was really bound up in the arts. Pa enjoyed the arts, but wasn't truly bound up in it. I don't think it was, I don't like what you're doing. I think we're doing different things. She needed to be loved and needed. And I think Pa probably got very, very bound up in his war work.
But whatever Delma had done, in the final months of the war, it was the Americans who had learnt their trade from Delma, who unleashed the most apocalyptic sex propaganda.
Confuse them, divide them, panic them, strike at their discipline, flatten them with bombs and atoms, spray them with gunfire, burn them with flamethrowers, and make the whole job easier by the use of morale operations.
The very famous 6 builder leaflets that were produced by the OSS in Rome are just the most terrible kind of sexual leaflets with bestiality and homosexuality, and just terrible, terrible things. And yet I talked to the fellow that drew them, very literate, very intelligent man who did those leaflets in the style of the poetry, the old German author poetry of the time, very classically and formally written. And he told me, well, the pictures were nothing. It was just to get him to hold it in the hand. I wanted him to think, is it possible that my son could be taken advantage of by a Hitler Youth leader? Is it possible that my wife is so lonely that she'd go to another woman? And it was curious, but the sex really was meaningless to him. It just was something that they threw on there just to catch the attention.
In 6 years of fighting, the propaganda war had escalated from coy nudes to the extremes of sexual violence, pornography, and death. In a war where everything had been allowed, a total war, his war, Delma had won. But at what cost?
This is Vicky speaking.
I gazed into the mirror with all the horror of Dorian Gray confronting his telltale portrait. There, staring at me, was the pallid, flabby-mouthed face of a crook. Was this, I asked myself, what 4 years of black had done to Sefton Delma?
The war was lost. And the political leadership knew that, of course. Goebbels knew that.
Yet they did not give up. Instead, the SS, Delma's old adversary, took over, under the leadership of Gunther Dalken, and their orders were clear.
To me, Delma said sometimes, there's no Geneva Convention in black propaganda. All is allowed. Deception, lies, subversive propaganda, and all these things.
Yeah.
Do all you can, by leaflets, by radio broadcasts, and so on, to win time. I asked Dalken, and he answered, believe it or not, we thought nasty things, of course. He was the king of nasty things, without any doubt, yeah.
By 1944, the war had entered its last, most vicious stage. America had joined, and the Germans were everywhere in retreat.
In autumn 1944, most of the German officers were convinced that